Damn, I love that stinger. And we are live. Every time it goes off, I'm just, wah! Very, very childish, but do you know what? That's me. That's what you get. Welcome to a World Anvil stream. We are, of course, talking with some of the most interesting people on the internet. And today we have Till. Till, how are you doing?
Hi. I'm doing fine. Happy New Year, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I am so happy to be back. We were supposed to go live yesterday, and unfortunately, Demetrius has the cold from hell. It may have some man flu symptoms attached to it. I will never tell. But he was too sick to go live yesterday. So, yeah, first stream of the new year. Best guest on the internet. I, of course, have here Till Lammer. Till is a professional designer, professional artist, one might say. Certainly an experienced storyteller. Certainly a professional map maker, and also the creator of Dungeon Fog, which helps idiots like me who have no artistic ability whatsoever also make maps that looks beautiful. Till, you are doing a charity to we who are artistically challenged, and I salute you. Thank you, Till.
Well, wow, that was a great introduction. Thank you very much. I feel like I should be like, who's she talking about? Oh, right. No, thank you very much. That was very kind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always so much fun to talk to you as well, of course, but I think we have so much fun that sometimes it's not clear that you are in fact a consummate professional and expert in the field of map making, and have literally written a book on the subject of locations and maps for them. Like literally written the book, right? That's what you've been doing.
That's what I've been doing together with so I'm just the co-author, the Guy Sklanders from How to Be a Great GM. He's the big guy. He's the one I'm just contributing where I can by just tossing my ideas into the pot. But yeah, that is something that is happening at the moment.
Very, very cool. And of course today we are talking about how to make battle maps, but a lot more than that. It's not just okay where to put the pieces. We're going to be talking about like what should go into a battle map, what shouldn't go into a battle map, and possibly my most important question of all, which is what should be the subject of a battle map in the first place. But before we get to that, I must start the raffle. I must not forget, because in addition to being my awesome friend, in addition to being an amazing map maker, Till and Dungeon Fog are also one of the sponsors of World Ember. World Ember. It's a thing. It exists. So it is, of course, still the World Ember season. The award ceremony will be at the end of this month on the 28th of January. So you can look forward to hearing who has won all of the Dungeon Fog memberships that are going out there. But I've got a sneaky one for you now. I've got a little raffle for a 12-month premium Dungeon Fog membership. Let me give that a start here. So, you know the drill. Exclamation point raffle. To take part in the raffle, you must be a follower of the channel in order to participate, because otherwise we end up giving things to bots and to bots. Forgive me. Yeah, so grab that Dungeon Fog. Make sure you stick around to the end of the stream to claim your prize. And I think it's time for the first question. Where do you set your battle maps in D&D and RPG games? Because you can make the most amazing battle map in the world, but if the location, the area that you choose isn't interesting, then your map is going to be boring. So what makes an interesting battle scene to map and to fight?
Okay, I think what we need to do is to answer that question is we need to start with the question what's the purpose. So here's a little fun bit. I because I'm also always struggling a little bit with the question of when should I use a battle map, what type of battle map should I use, all those things, right? I've created a little acronym that helps me, and the acronym is space, right? Every battle map needs space. Isn't that great? It actually stands for story, purpose, atmosphere, clarity, and encounter. So that's what space stands for. And if you can
So,
Come again? Sorry?
say that again for us so we can catch it.
Yes. Space stands for story,
Story,
purpose,
purpose,
atmosphere,
atmosphere. Nice.
clarity,
Nice. Okay, I can see where we're going with this.
and encounter. Right?
Love it. Love it.
So, and when you look at all those each components, I think that kind of answers your question, because the first thing is you need to ask yourself where in the story and how in the story does my battle map actually fit. That can be like, you can, and also how can my battle map help to transpire what my world, what my lore is bringing to my PCs through story, like past events. Are there remnants of past events that I can put on my battle map to be explorable for my players? Foreshadowing. Can I use my battle map to do some foreshadowing just through the map design itself? And there are many ways how I could do that. The easiest example would be to say, okay, we have a spider lair, and the spider queen is waiting for my PCs at the end of the dungeon. So how can I foreshadow that through adding cobwebs and little hatched eggs throughout the dungeon that are going to be more and more of them as they progress. So that's the story part, right? But there's also purpose, and that is more about, why did I bring that battle map in the first place? That's not just the purpose of the dungeon, which is an aspect of it, but it's also, what's the purpose of my narrative in there? Because for those of you who have been using maps, you're quite familiar with the fact that bringing a map to the table slows your story down. And that can be purposefully intended to do, because a combat needs the tactical layout to map out that combat. So you can use the same like a bullet time focus into the combat to bring the battle map, and then you have quite a nice balance between the slowdown, which happens as combat goes into a round-based system, and the map. But you can fuck it up quite a lot if you bring a map in the wrong sense to the game. So that's why I personally talk about different types of map, because there is the kind of the crawl map, the exploration map, where people go from room to room and explore. This is awesome to build tension and to transpire lore, but it's terrible for pacing, because you can't build up excitement if your players are going from room to room and be like, well, that's a very interesting spot in the corner, we need to investigate that. And in the meantime, the music is beating up. And you're like, and there is no, wait, I want to investigate that drawer first. And you're like, there goes my tension. So the purpose is intended to think about, how is it helping my narrative? And then you can also ask the question, what's the purpose of this place? Was this designed to be a temple? Was this designed to be a hideout? Is that camp? What was the purpose of the location? And what's the purpose for my storytelling, right? Atmosphere, I think, is quite obvious. When you think about the atmosphere of your map, you need to think about, what's the mood? What's the story atmosphere in general? What's the setting that we're playing? And how can I make my map work in that atmosphere? So we're talking about lighting, we're talking about color, we're talking about tension building again. How can I use the map to play and contribute to the atmosphere that I'm trying to create? Now, clarity is something that I think might be a bit disputed about, because I personally think that you should not clutter your map with too much stuff. I think you only should put things on the map that help to understand the purpose of the location they're in. Like if they are in a dining room, a table and chairs might help. But I don't think that it is utterly useful to then have forks and spoons and different type of salad bowls and all that stuff on the table Although, again, that is a personal preference from me, because I know that people love to decorate. However, I would recommend to stick with the important parts that help the story. And then if you are into doing a lot of decoration, then somehow make it in a way that it doesn't kind of derail from your story. So that's clarity. And last but not least is encounter, because honestly, the only reason why we should bring a battle map or an encounter map is because something's going on there. And you need to think about the encounter components that are relevant there, which is movement, combat spacing, obstacles, traps. So there's a lot of stuff there, but it's game mechanic-y stuff that you want to pay attention to. Otherwise, you might end up, and I've seen that through professional publications, where you put your end boss encounter in a room that is too small for a 4 to 6 party to actually battle that encounter, because it might make sense because this is actually how a real medieval temple would look like. But unfortunately, those medieval temples were never constructed to host a dragon and a party to fight them. So you have to think about, what do I want to throw at my players and how can I make that work in the environment? And if it doesn't work in the environment, you either have to bring a different boss or you have to tweak the environment.
I love that.
That's space. That's my little helper, my space helper.
That is amazing. So when you talk about atmosphere, what are some of the things you can choose for with examples? So like, if I'm trying to choose for a scary atmosphere, or if I'm trying to choose for something that creates wonder, what should I be choosing for?
Okay. So atmosphere is when you're creating your map and you want to bring atmosphere onto your map, you have to think of your map like a scene in a movie. And you're the movie director. You are in control of the props that you put on that map, and you're in control of the lighting team who's responsible for adding the right atmospheric light. And then the whole tonality that is underlined with music and sounds and all that stuff. Now, that's generally how you create atmosphere. So for map making, working with light and shadow is super important, because just purely by thinking about how is the light in that environment can very critically affect how that map or that environment is perceived. Think about a cave with a lot of dark corners, or a well-lit forest, or take a forest and do the two opposites, where you say, okay, this is a forest on a sunshiny day, where light rays are cast through the foliage, or this is a dark, gloomy forest with an overhung, shadowy sky, and dark spots between all the foliage and the shrubberies and everything there. So that alone is critical to create interesting atmosphere. I think we all believe that an old house ruin is much more creepy at night when the moon shines through the broken windows than it is on a beautiful day where you hear the birds tweeting and you're like, oh, look, it's a broken out old house. Let's go inside and have a ball in there.
Oh, look, flowers have grown on the dining
Yeah.
table. How
Oh,
quaint.
how nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
The moss is warm and warm and green and fresh. So that is that, and that also then plays into color theming, right? Colors speak to us, and I mean culturally, it might speak different languages. So different colors might transport a different feeling. But generally speaking, we know, especially if we create maps for our groups, what type of colors are inherently coming with what emotions and associations. So we can, and I mean, we see that, or if we're doing it clever, we don't see it in movies where a light bluish hue is often added to scenes that there might not be blue light source for that, but still it has that hue to it. The same with green or orange, where you can light the scene with a color that's not naturally existing in that environment at the moment, but you're creating a subtle tone just by adding that kind of lighting to the map. And luckily, we are in a fantasy environment, or sometimes at least in a fantasy environment or a sci-fi environment, where different light sources might be explainable if players are like, "Ooh, why is the room lit in green?" And you're like, "Well, that's magic." They're like, "Oh, I
It
don't
seems to
like
be
green."
emanating from the walls in some eldritch
Yeah,
fashion.
exactly. And then they're like, "Well, I don't like green a lot. That sounds like poison or undead, or I don't know." And you've got them exactly where you need them. So talking about atmosphere, light and shadow, super important. We are as human beings, as human beings, we're afraid of dark areas. Shadows are creepy because we don't know what's in there. So working with shadows is super important. And then with light and colors, we can emphasize on that, let's say, fear, or that emotional message that we transport.
Yeah, absolutely. As Bonnie Juju says, and where is that ominous music coming from?
Exactly. Why do I suddenly hear organs playing? Is that the boss battle starting? Yes, it
When the
is.
characters go, wait, why is the music changed?
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, the music has changed.
So, you mentioned a little bit about colors. Do you have any tips for color schemes? Because I think this is something that a lot of beginner creators run into. Essentially, the first one is they don't pick an interesting location to put their battle in the first place, and I think we've covered that. The next one is okay, they put things together, but they don't really have a good color scheme. So all the colors look like they're at war with each other. This is definitely an issue I have had personally when I'm making maps. Do you have any tips for that?
Um, no easy tip, unfortunately. I feel like, so what I've been doing is when I draw the dungeon, I pick the I usually have a prop or something that I feel like is the most interesting element on that map.
Okay, so like a
Um,
hero element.
exactly. So that might be a chandelier or a throne or an altar. And when I pick that, uh, I can then run just so from Dungeon Fork, which offers a library of those things. They come with certain colors. So if I start to theme that around the according asset, I'm quite good because I have a leading theme, and I start to color around them. Now, if unfortunately or luckily, you can recolor things in Dungeon Fork, which makes it a bit back and forth. If you pick an asset and then you recolor it, you have to recolor all the other things. So I've been using color palettes. So if I want to create a unique room, I do some kind of background research where I'm looking up cool images that are kind of in the sphere of what that is. And there are some cool online tools where you can import an image and then create the leading color theme out of it, like the color palette out of it. So if you're completely lost with that and you're like, which colors should I use? Um, if you're using an asset pack, typically those assets are all colored in the same theme, so they are fitting already. If you're mixing between different asset packs, try to find a good color balance by adjusting them. And if you're completely fresh and you're like, okay, just want to get an inspiration, do some web research, look at amazing pictures where you're like, okay, I really like that picture. That's the tone I want to catch.
Yeah.
and then create a color palette out of it by using, I think Adobe has an online tool where you can put an image, but there are online palette pickers that you can use.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. So that actually brings me very nicely to my next question. You mentioned, how color is a key element. What do you think are, let's say, 3 key elements of a D&D battle map, or any other RPG battle map? Like, what should you be thinking of? I know you use the SPACE acronym, but if you have to boil it down into sort of the 3 key components, what would they be?
Don't forget about terrain. I think a lot of people are forgetting about how terrain actually influences architecture. It's much easier to create an interesting, like out of the normal architecture if you have a terrain first. Think about the mountain fortress or the mountain temple. They don't usually go in there, take a giant stone saw and cut the tip of the mountain and then put their temple on top. That would be a lot of work. They usually look at areas where they can somehow squeeze their temple in, which means they have to build around the given terrain. So if you want to create interesting locations, start with the terrain. And then don't tweak the terrain. I know we are God when it comes to map making. We're like, I don't really like that crevasse. It's blocking my throne room. Well, yeah, it is. So how are you going to solve it without erasing your crevasse? And how are you going to solve it with building the throne room in a location that still works with that crevasse being there? So terrain is an important. Second, layout is super important, and it's on a meta. I think on a meta plane, layout is important because just by showing you the shape of a church in a blueprint kind of style, you can very easily distinguish what kind of religion might be behind the church's layout. If I say Roman, if I say Christian basilisk or Christian cathedral, we all instantly know the shape of it. So you can reverse that. If I would show you a shape, you would be most likely able to say, well, that's a church. So layout is inherently something that players cling to because we as humans, we try to identify pattern. So having an interesting layout just by the shape of how the rooms are aligned, you can, if you play with that, you can create super interesting battle maps or dungeons with that can be very elvish or very, very dwarven. Because for just again, as a simple example, if you look at those Celtic crosses, I don't know why, maybe it's just me, but with those Celtic symbols, I always have kind of a dwarven association with. Whereas those long bend shapes, curvatures, semicircles, this is more like where my brain puts me on elven. So if I want to distinguish a dwarven tomb versus an elven tomb, I would be using more blocky, Celtic shaped layouts for a dwarven tomb, and I would use more like circulish, roundish, elongated shapes for elven. So the layout is super important too. And the third one, sorry, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to say as a note on that, it kind of, if that's not where your brain is going when you hear those juxtapositions, that's okay. And also, if you've got a world where you don't have elves and dwarves, you have something else.
Yes, of course.
It still works. As long as you establish a pattern, your players are going to start picking up on that. And they're going to be like, oh, this is like the other place we went that had the triangles. There are triangles here. This is definitely the Beluga people. The Beluga people love triangles. We are in trouble, for example.
Exactly. That's exactly the thing. And that's just the layout. So we have terrain, right? We have layout. So the terrain helps us to be creative in the space that we're creating and not just do always the same layout for our architecture, for example. But the architecture and the way that that the architecture follows a certain layout then helps us again to emphasize what type of structure that might be. And then I would say it's still color is the third most important thing. I wouldn't say it's decoration. Decoration is helping to establish what the purpose of the place is and who's been living here, what are they doing in this room, but you can narrate that. It's having kind of a color theme to it where you drive players just purely by color to the, let's say, to the through on the emotional coaster wheel of tension and release, right, to the climax. So color is I think the third part that you should do.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like after this, I might finally be ready to make a battle map that is not terrible. So I'm very excited to go and try.
Well, luckily, I mean, so the thing is, my intention with Dungeon Fork has always been to create a tool that kind of helps you in that progress. So a lot of what we're talking about is inherently baked into the software, and it tries to do that for you already. So if you pick an asset pack, all the colors there are already in line. If you look at the way that you kind of pick textures for walls and floors, we did our best to kind of bring them in sync as well. So it should be fairly simple, and which means the part where you can get creative then is adding some light sources or some color themes into it. And of course, by drawing the shapes of the layout itself.
Yeah. So you mentioned terrain as a really good way to improve your battle map. And I think that is absolutely, definitely the case. But what are the different kinds of terrain that are available to us? Like, what can we use? What are our options in the terrain oeuvre that we can pull on to create more interesting maps?
Or what not? Okay, so all the terrain. Well, the thing is, again, it kind of ties a little bit back to the story part, right? We're telling a story. That's why we're here. We're trying to bring a story to our PCs, and the battle map is a tool to help us do a little bullet time focus on a specific area where something interesting happens. So that would be how we describe battle maps generally. Which means that by the location they are generally traveling, we already know what terrain will be around. If they're moving through forests, terrain will be, depending on where the forest is, somewhere in a foothill to montane zone of a mountain. It might be in a valley, depending on what type of forest that is. It could be a jungle or a rainforest, or it could be a temperate forest like softwood. Or hardwood forest. So knowing where the location is helps us to set the terrain. Now, if we always go for, well, it's flat terrain, then we're robbing ourselves of opportunities to create something interesting. So elevation is something interesting, because that suddenly forces us to think kind of away from the two-dimensional space into a three-dimensional space.
I have the high ground.
Yeah, exactly. Which adds depth to the battle map that we're creating. Literally depth, because we're thinking on separate levels of altitude there.
Yeah.
And usually, I mean, that's very broad-fetched. I'm not sure if that is kind of a general rule, but if you have the chance to bring water into the mix, bring water into the mix, because that also always creates interesting battle maps if you have water. So the thing is, if you want to break it down, there are movable and non-movable spaces, and the mix, the in between is the difficult terrain. So when you create a map, that is, if we're talking just about terrain, it's elevation, difficult terrain, and and generally accessible space, right? That's what we're trying to understand and bake into the map.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add that although D&D 5e does not have rules for high ground specifically, it says in the GM's guide that you can, at your discretion, give advantage. There are plenty of systems that do, and this can mechanically affect, like the choices that you make. Bringing in cover is another one. Like the choices that you make affect not just the feeling of the battle, but the actual mechanics of the battle.
Absolutely.
Like,
also, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I like what you said about water, and I would say lava too, because anything that creates edges and dangers, spiky pits, fields of lava, fast-flowing rivers. Do you know what? You have 3 rounds before you are gone out of the battle map, unless you get out of the river. That's interesting. That's cool for a battle.
Yeah. I mean, now we're circling back a little bit to the E part, the encounter part of the space acronym, where it's all about the game mechanics and how can you bake your battle map into the game mechanics. Because again, it's technically it's about range of attack, it's about movement, and it's about cover and possibly high ground, as you just said. So tactical positioning. And you can do a lot of stuff with those things if you think about that. In a classical 5e, right, the regular player, let's say most of it, I mean, there are racial difference and class difference who can move slower or faster, but typically the movement is somewhere around 30 feet, which equals 6 squares if 5 feet is a square, which means if your combat zone is smaller than a 6x6 field, it means that whoever is the first will reach the opponent. So if you want to avoid something, if you want to have positioning, you have to start with a combat field of at least 12 by 12 grids, because then they have to dash to actually get there. But at that moment, rivers, lavas, crevasses, elevation, all those things start to come into play because they are whatever the rule is, but most systems have something like a difficult terrain rule. They're obstacles. They render down the movement capabilities of the party, and suddenly your map becomes part of the encounter, because they have to overcome those obstacles. They can hide behind something, or the enemy can hide behind something. So now we're talking about something that gets interesting there, and we can go back to purpose and story, and we're like, but how do we create these things in the given story and with the given purpose of what we want to place that battle map in?
What I love about your approach is that every battle map is sort of different and tailored. And I love that so much. And it really tailored to the story, because I feel like a lot of times in games I have played an generic map, and it has been sort of shoehorned in there, and it doesn't feel like the campaign. But do you know what? I had 2 minutes, so I just grabbed something from online, and this is where we're playing today, guys.
Exactly.
But what you're suggesting is really the opposite of that. It's something that is created bespoke for the story, with the story.
It is one type of map. Of course, you can grab a map that is more or less working for you, and just do that. However, if we're talking about map making for a party, there is one component in the things that you've listed that was missing, and that is the players themselves. Because if we know our party, we can make maps specifically for this party. Because if we know that they're all flying, or they all have dark vision, or they're all rangers, then that impacts on what we want to do with that map to still create an interesting encounter. And sometimes it is actually helping to create something that's unfair to certain party members. You shouldn't do it all the time to the same members, then you're probably an asshole. But if you create an encounter where you have two ranged fighters and 3 melee fighters, and it is so that the ranged fighters are at a disadvantage, that's not bad. That's not something where you're terrible. That's something where you create an interesting conflict, because now the others have to come up and compensate for those two. That's maps that are specifically tailored toward your party. And if you're doing something like that, and if you're running your own homebrew game for your regular players, then I would highly advocate that you do that you create maps that are tailored to the capabilities of the party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my favorite things to suggest when things are getting boring is take away their toys and see what happens. So why not do one fight in a dead magic zone? Sorry, mages.
Yeah.
Why not do one fight where, the thing is flying, so anybody with melee needs to think outside the box in order to actually take part. What you're doing, as long as you only do it once, what you're doing is you're encouraging them to think of different ways their characters can enact with a battle. There are very few players who will just sit in a corner and sulk if just once their main thing is not going to work. They have to try something else.
Yes, and if you're a kind GM, then you put something into that environment that they can utilize to overcome this flaw, like a ballista that needs to be repaired for a round before it works. So you're not just like parents taking away the toy and say like you're in timeout now. You're like, well, okay, how about you take a look around and see what you can do to overcome that obstacle. Which again comes into the clarity part of the space acronym, where you have to make sure that they actually can identify the thing that they can use, and the encounter part where you say, okay, and here's how the battle mechanic help you to overcome that encounter.
Yeah, exactly. And then make sure you don't do it all the time, because they will get mad.
And if you're in a boss fight, which would bring you on a layer map, possibly, you can then also start to think about how the environment itself is also taking part in the combat, with a boss room filling with lavas, with tentacles shooting out of the wall, with narrowing walls that push together while you still have to fight the boss. So if you're not designing if you're designing maps for particular encounters and a particular party, you have all the tools to get creative there.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about something very, very contentious in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, particularly, but other RPGs as well. Traps. How can you make it, I don't know, feel fair is the question. How do you hide traps in plain sight? It's kind of what we're getting at.
My answer, you don't. Well, the thing is, what's a trap? A trap is like everything else in our game, is a challenge. It is something that your players want to spot. That's where they feel special, that they have spotted the trap. Nothing, I think, that you don't put anything to the mix. If you make a trap that is so cleverly hidden that they only learn about it when they have triggered the trap. And the only reason you would do that is because there are more of the same kind. And now that they have triggered one trap, they are capable of finding the other ones. So I would never hide a trap in plain sight without an indication of that there is a trap. Which means, again, from a map making perspective, I would somehow mark that floor or that wall or that door. I would render it a bit different from the rest, so that if my party looks at the map and is like, well, there's dirt everywhere, why is that tile not dirty? I'm like, okay, maybe you should do a check on that. So that's the thing, right? I'm not the biggest fan of traps generally. I think they're hardly ever helping to the narrative. But if you want to place traps, or if you occasionally want to put them, then you should make them in a way that your players can spot them. Otherwise, it's not a challenge for them. It's just something that happens. The finger of God being like, you're done.
Rocks fall, everyone dies.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, just before we get to the audience questions, and there are some fantastic ones, I do have a question. Imagine this, Till. Imagine. I'm sure it's never happened to you, but imagine this. Your session has suddenly arrived. The day has arrived. You thought that you had loads of time, but suddenly it's crept up on you. You've got 5 minutes before your players arrive. Of course, bringing snacks, they are the best players. And you haven't done your battle map yet. You know you want a battle map. You know what it should be. You've thought about where it should be, but you haven't made the map. How do you make a 5-minute battle map, Till? Take us through it.
Am I allowed to cheat?
I mean, you can give us the cheat answer and then give us a real answer if you want.
Okay. So if I only have 5 minutes, I will probably fall back to theater of the mind, because there's no way I can do a map in 5 minutes. But if it's like, okay, just quickly, very roughly, keep it to the absolute minimum of things, like layout, shapes. What is the room shaped like? One asset, one prop in there that explains what the purpose is. Basic coloring, just quickly go over with a color brush that says, okay, this is blue, which means safe zone. This is green, which means danger zone. And this is red, which means boss room. And yeah, and that's it. That's how I would go about it. Now, cheating. I would simply go to the public library, like our community hub on Dungeon Fork, and type the map type, because there are, like, I think by now there are almost 20,000 maps in there. And I'm pretty sure someone else has created such a map already. So I'll just grab it and quickly tweak it to my games. But honestly, it exactly. Honestly, I think if you see yourself, if you picture yourself in that situation, and that is an important part of your story, and you fucked up and didn't make the map for that, you have to derail them. That's the only way to do it, is to say, okay, no, I'm not wasting this amazing scene that I have put up in my mind and the battle that's going to commence. And now I'm kind of destroying all of that by throwing a shitty map at them. I will say, like, okay, something happens. There's something you want to investigate here. Come, other direction. And I would save that one for a different combat where I am prepped. Yeah. My answer.
I would also, no, it's a good answer, and I think that you've really nailed it, honestly. Which is like, if it's just a combat and you just want a map, you can either theater of the mind it or sketch something out. For the sketching, in the past, I've used like coins and stuff to give the impression of walls and this kind of thing, because you can also move them around really quickly. So instead of having to erase the map, you can just be like, shift the coins to the right place and be like, and there's the walls. And it's something, I like it because it doesn't feel too much like a map. So it doesn't feel like a map. It feels more like a representation. So that's worked quite well for me. It's just like markers or coins or something on a battle map square. Or steal one from Dungeon Fog, because holy crap, your community makes some beautiful maps with Dungeon Fog. A bunch of people in the chat were like, just go check out the Dungeon Fog community. You've got some fans in here today, too. Yeah, absolutely. Like, your players don't know what's next.
Yeah.
You know what's next, but your players don't know what's next. So you can always just switcheroo. You can extend the mega crawl that they've been going through, or present them with a puzzle that's going to keep them occupied for a little bit longer. Or just, it's not that bit of the forest. If you've created a forest, it's not that bit of the mountain. It's just a bit later than you thought. Or, they get to the layer and the thing is not there. Oh my God, what are they going to do? Well, you didn't have time to make the layer, so they can go and have a look in, but maybe they can't even get in right now. Until the monster comes back, they can't even enter the layer. There are all sorts of story ways to make this work, where you can just be like, not even let them know that you've changed your plans, but change your plan.
So I have, to be honest, I have tried to live map in Dungeon Fog once, where we're like, okay, let's just create the room while you're exploring it. That didn't work so well, because you want to have some time to create and fine-tune and decorate your map, and you don't want your players to wait while you're doing that. But if you're super desperate, if your players are very much into, they need to go there right now, send them on a quick pizza break, ask for 15 minutes, and try to find something in the community hub that you can grab. Find something on Pinterest that fits the purpose of it, and then do your best to kind of pause them so that when the next session comes up, you are then prepared for it.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of audience questions today, some really, really good ones. And I want to start with this one, which is from Kayatan. And Kayatan asks, sorry, I have to say it. What is the best map making software and why is it Dungeon Fog?
Well, you kind of self-answered the question then in that regards. There are a lot of
fan.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of great tools out there. I think it comes to the question of what you expect from your tools, right? And probably because I am part German and this is kind of baked into my personality, Dungeon Fog is a lot about efficiency and aesthetics, where you like, okay, I quickly want to make a map, but I want to make it look great. And that's where we try to put the emphasis on the software.
No, I love that. Great question from Bonnie Juju, who asks, how many elevations or dimensions are too many for a battle map? You, of course, suggested using elevation, it makes your map more interesting, but when does it get too complicated?
So from my personal experience, I lost most of my players when I went beyond 2 levels of elevation. Like, you have a base, and then you're like, okay, there's a step down, there's a step up, and there at least could be one more. But then it gets super complicated. So if you think about something where you have a I don't know, let me think about something. Where you have an Aztec ziggurat, and every step is on a different elevation, and you want to make combat there, and you're like, well, what now? And you have to move up. That's fine if that's just that. But if you then have kind of a counter ziggurat, and it depends on which elevation, then it gets too much. So I would say, basically, if you have something like a mountain pass, there is the main road, then there is a lower elevation that allows to creep and crawl, a higher elevation that gives you kind of better sight and overlook, and probably one more, and that's good. I wouldn't do more.
Yeah. Also, on the topic of elevations, we have from Dark Elf Twilight, curious how you would suggest drawing a map that has 3D-dimensional movement and combat elements, like an underwater map where rock and coral formations with tunnels and all sorts of bits and bobs.
Okay, so usually what I do is I use the scaling of textures to represent the distance from the camera. So again, let's look at a mountain pass with the general road in the center, and then a higher elevation and the lower elevation. The center has regular texture size, let's say at 100%. Now, if you move closer to the camera, that means the texture for that specific area becomes bigger. So then all the terrain texture that I use for the elevated segments sits at probably 150 to 200% of the texture scale, which makes it look closer to the camera, whereas the lower part, the side path that is a bit beneath the road, there I go down to 50 to 80% texture scale from the original one. The second thing you can do is you can slightly play with the size of the grid. Now, the problem with grid usually is it should be exactly an inch. But you can have a little bit of an offshoot where it's like 0.8 inch for the lower one and 1.2 inch for the higher one. The eye catches that and it makes it look differently from the camera perspective. And the same then, of course, goes with props. Like if you put a rock upper, it should be a bit bigger, center normal, bottom smaller. So that's how I usually do it.
There's a lot of love for that answer, Till, I will say. The other thing that I would say, which is much simpler if you are a novice in map making, is make your map sideways. So this is something Guy Sclanders did in our Ghost of Saltmarsh game that was on the Dungeons and Dragons channel on Twitch. He made a map of the Great Chasm, and instead of making it a top-down map, he made it a side-on, like a side elevation, as it's called in archaeology.
I'm really sorry, I have to steal that credit.
Was that you?
Yeah, that was me. And it was the first time I did it. It was the first time I did it, and I was like, Guy and I were discussing it, and I was like, we could do that. Don't we want to try that? And it works so good, especially for water. It is amazing. It always takes a bit for the players to adjust, and you have to point out, look, guys, you're now looking at it sideways.
Yeah.
But then it's beautiful, which reminds me, there is another aspect, which is lightness. Like again, light, dark, and shadow. Light and shadow. You can use top to the camera, top to the sun is most lit, medium lit, low lit, which again, in combination, will make it absolutely clear which is on top and which is on bottom.
Yeah, so chiaroscuro, in fact.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. So yeah, but what was it called? The Chasm of Golgur or something.
Yeah.
Amazing. That was
I was
so
no, to be honest, I remember that Guy was like, I would like to do something like that. Can we do it? And I was like, so I'm not stealing the credit from Guy. Guy was the one who came up with the idea. And I then went in and like, can I draw that map with Dungeon Fog? And I was so super surprised that I was actually able to do it.
Exciting. That was amazing.
Kind of hijacking a lot of assets that were not intended to be side view assets.
Oh man, it worked though. It was a great map. We all lost our proverbial crap when the thing came along. It was incredible. Okay, I think we have fully answered three-dimensional movement combat
Yeah,
elements.
I think we have.
It is tough. You can do it. If you want to put your battle in air or space or underwater, that's a way to do it, or several ways to do it. So we have a great question from Tillers here, which is there a way to add mood to a city map besides color themes? Because usually the number of building styles for cities is quite limited. So I have some ideas about this from an anthropological perspective, but I want to hear from Till on a mapping perspective.
Apart from light, the question is, where does the mood come from? What type of mood do you want to transpire? And I think it is coming down to the question of how littered is the place, probably. How worn down is the place? If you want to, I mean, that might be, I apologize if that is a very personal kind of perspective on the matter. But I feel like the more, if I go into a location where the rooftops are broken down, where a lot of dirt is on the street, where probably blood is still spilled over the sidewalks, that doesn't feel like a safe location to be in there. Whereas if you have pristine buildings, if you have wide spaces, then you are then it feels much more safe. So what you want to do is you want to play with the basic. And again, it comes down to what is the mood that you want to transpire. But let's say if it is a feeling of ominous threat and danger and fear that you want to instill into that environment, play with claustrophobia. How do you say that word? Claustrophobia. Dark corners, littered places, like tending to those general, let's say, basic human fears that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So funnily enough, my answer was going to be a lot along the same vein, which is, people in cities are at a premium for space. So where space is wasted, these are the rich areas, these are the nice areas. That's where you have a park. That's where you have wide streets with streetlights in them. That's where you have, buildings that are, very, very big, and they all have their own backyards, for example. This is stuff that you can play with. And then, in the slums, everything is close together. Everything is a short as a short building. They don't have money to build high. Everything's built of wood. It's not built of stone or corrugated iron. It's not built of immaculate glass and steel, depending on your sort of technological era and what you're trying to create. It's you can really use spacing and materials, as well as things like, as Till said, the litter, the decoration, the these kinds of feelings, and color and lighting to start suggesting different areas in a city or a different overall feel.
Yeah, and again, because Till said, which is a fair point, all those map making tools, they only offer a limited variety of different buildings. Now, usually, all those tools have the kind of certain distinction between low, medium, high budget buildings. So at least you can use those. But what you said is perfectly accurate. It means the more space you give to an area, the wealthier that space is, the bigger the buildings can get. And then again, it comes down to the mood that you want to instill. If there's a lot of, even in a rich city, if there's a lot of desperation flying in this space, I think the first thing, well, at least that's my fantasy, the first thing that starts to suffer is public cleaning. So there might be dirt on the streets. The streets might be broken down, not well kept. And if you enter like a villa district and the streets are dirty, you are most certainly going to be like, well, there's something wrong here.
But also, if I can piggyback off that thought, if you go into the park and the tree is dead and there are like graves in there and there's a statue, but it's half fallen down, that's also telling you a certain something about the city. So you can use those other kinds of elements, like trees that are beautifully verdant or dead, or flowers, or random cups that are in the street as opposed to on somebody's table in a house. Like, these are the kinds of things that you can really think outside the box and play with.
That's a really good advice, because turn it around. What if we want to make a super friendly slum, right? Use things that you would expect in another location, like have little gardens and little flowers everywhere,
like chickens and dogs everywhere, and
and you're like, okay, that's a nice environment.
Like a little communal allotment. These are the kinds of things that you can sort of throw in there. Suleyan says the flower bed is occupied and it ain't by flowers.
Dun dun
Yes,
dun.
absolutely. So you really can play with a lot of these kinds of elements that you don't normally associate with cities, but you can bring them in, because when you really look at cities, they're full of trees, they're full of squirrels and animals and dogs and children, and you can throw those elements in here and then color those elements rather than just relying on the buildings themselves. Because even in even in real life, like there's only so much you can learn from a building when you're looking at it from above. So,
Mm.
use the other
And
elements as well. Give the city
yes,
space to breathe or strangle it. Make a
and
choice about those things.
think about expectations, and how you can break them. Like that is always interesting if you play with expectations and you break them, which means that you have a kind of Gothic city with a pyramid in the center. Is like, how does that work? Well, interesting. You've piqued the interest. So yeah, I think I can't come up with more ideas on how to do that. I hope, Tillett, your question is answered.
I think we have thoroughly answered that question. I would like to remind everyone that I'm going to be pulling the raffle in one of your finest Earth minutes. So, exclamation point raffle, if you haven't already, to make sure that you are in it to win it. And in the meantime, Till, who are you? What do you do? And where can we find you?
Okay, just quickly adding to the raffle, if you already have a Dungeon Fog premium membership, don't worry about it. The code is actually something that you can also, so what you receive is a code that you can give to your fellow GM, hand it out, so you can pass that on. And if you win the code and you have an ongoing membership, just reach out to us at support@dungeonfog.com, and we can make it work that you pause or cancel your subscription and use the code instead. Just as an advice here. Who am I?
Who are you, Till? Who are you?
And where am I? And why am I here?
What are you doing?
What am I doing here? Again, I think most of you have got an idea of that I am somehow involved with Dungeon Fog. I'm the CEO and the founder of Dungeon Fog, which means that about 5 to 6 years ago, I was running office games with my agency. I had a web design agency, and I was a teacher for graphics design and web design at a small private university here in Vienna. And we started playing D&D. And I wasn't happy with the tools that were out there by that time. So we started to build our own software, which is today Dungeon Fog, the battle map editor. And yeah, I like from a personal background, again, I have what I studied was multimedia designer and graphic designer. I think for 10 years, I have been teaching at the university. And it might be a reason why I click so good with battle maps is our graphic design agency was our main customers were medical congresses. So we did a lot of floor plans for medical conventions, and maybe some of that has stuck with me, which I still very much enjoy doing floor plans, but for castles and dungeons.
I love that.
Yeah, I have a family. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She has been playing D&D quite a few times.
A convert. I like it.
Yeah, and I think she's slowly getting to the point where she would like to run a game once for us. So we will see. Yeah, I have a wife, a beautiful, lovely wife, and the dungeon dog, Zeus, and the dungeon cat, Hades.
I love that your cat's called Hades, can I just say?
Yeah. Well, that was a family vote. It was, we knew that we were getting a cat puppy and a dog puppy. And we were like, well, if we get them almost at the same time, probably they should be named somehow in relation. And my vote was on Sherlock and Watson. So Sherlock the cat and Watson the dog. I think that would have been brilliant.
Yes, very appropriate. I approve.
But Isabel, my daughter, gave the final vote on Zeus and Hades.
Amazing. I think it's time to close the raffle. So I'm picking the winner.
Yes.
Who is Delana. Extra lucky Delana. Are you in the house to claim your prize? Delana, you know what to do. Please say something to claim your prize. What she says, yes, Delena, you have won a year of Dungeon Fog, which is, can I just say, Delena is an author, not an RPG game master. I have used Dungeon Fog to map out the scenes that happen in my books to make sure that the things are happening in the right place. I've used it to map out in more detail historical locations that exist in my books, again, so that I can figure out where people are going and keep track of which stairs they need to go up to do the thing to get to the place. So yeah, I would say it has been very useful for me as an author as much as it has been for a GM. Holy good grief! We have just had 2 enormous raids. Guys, welcome! We have been discussing battle maps today, how to make amazing ones, where to put your battles, where to set your battles for maximum bang for your stab, naturally. And we're actually wrapping up, but I'm really pleased to see you here. Welcome. To oh goodness, it's going so fast I can't keep up. Griwatsky and Orkish TV. Hey, Myri.
Oh, hi, Myri.
So we have a bunch of German speakers who've come in, probably. So Till, if you'd like to say something in German to them, please go ahead.
Hallo, herzlich willkommen und natürlich Prosit Neujahr, ihr Lieben. Willkommen im Jahr 2023. Ich hoffe, es wird ein ganz hervorragendes Jahr für uns Rollenspieler, für uns Storyteller, für uns alle. Herzlich willkommen.
I cannot speak German that you would like to hear, apart from oh goodness, it's all gone. All of my German is gone. Oh no, der Hülleracher kocht in meinen Herzen. There you are. I can speak opera German. That's all I can speak.
Oh my god, that was from Zauberflöte, wasn't it?
Yeah, Queen of the Night.
Yeah.
That was my my previous life when I was Queen of the Night, before I was the CEO of World Anvil, because sometimes life is crazy. Sometimes you spend one day being the Queen of the Night on stage and the next day being a CEO, which is kind of what happened to me. So it is with great regret, my beautiful people, that we should probably wrap this up, but I want to welcome you all. We do a lot of streams like this with experts like Till, expert authors and expert RPG players and expert RPG writers, map makers. So if you want to follow the channel, and you can come back when we are live again. We mainly speak English here, I'm afraid. Although maybe that will change in the near future. Who knows? Who dares to dream? You can hear me speak some languages very badly, and some others speak very, very proficiently, I am sure. But I think in the meantime, we are off to see Rookery Publications. I have a very, very dear friend in the business called Andy Law. You may know him from Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, or many other very, very fine things. He's a cartographer, a writer, and all things wonderful. And the Rookery is where he hangs out with his amazing wife, Lindsay, and a cadre of awesomeness. So we are going on a raid now. Our raid shout is Light Up the Forge. So shout it out when you get there to let them know that we sent you. And yeah, maybe give them a follow as well. They are good, good people and lovely, lovely beings and also experts. I think it's time to call it a day. So
thank you very much for having me.
Oh my goodness, anytime, Till. You know you're always welcome back. We love having you here. You know what to say, I think, when I tell everybody to grab their hammer and go world build. See you soon, my sweet beans. Bye.
Bye.